Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. Before we get started with the panel tonight, we have a brief message from our friends at SAE. Are they still in the house? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Sam and Mario. And I'll just take a moment. So my name is Chris Bachman. I'm a faculty member at Cal State Los Angeles. I got into this studying battery materials, but the students got me really excited about not only the batteries, but building the whole vehicle. And so at Cal State LA, I got involved with our student chapter for the Society of Automotive Engineers. And I got more and more involved. And there's actually chapters at about 25 schools in Southern California doing automotive engineering. And we work to connect those students with industry and other academics. And so I just want to take a moment here to see, if there's any students or, teachers in this room afterwards who are interested about creating a kind of club or chapter for the Society of Automotive Engineers, let us know. Or if you just want to hear about some of our events, we just got done with an event for about 250 people at the Lions Automobilia Museum with students and professors and industry reps from across Southern California. So if you want to hear about those events, they're free and you can come and network, get jobs, and learn about engineering. So I'm really excited about this panel, and thanks for giving me a moment, Sam.
All right. All right. So real quick, the agenda for tonight, we're going to start off with a panel with our esteemed guests here and talk about the future of transportation, and which will be followed after about 50 minutes, 50, by a period for questions and answers. So be thinking about the questions that you have while you listen to the panelists discuss their perspectives, and we'd be happy to answer questions during that Q&A period, which will last, followed by some refreshments afterwards if you would like to continue to network or speak to the panelists directly. Before I get started, I'd like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Sam Baker. I'm the managing partner of Mobility VC. We're an early stage investor in transportation technologies, and I'm very grateful for all of you. And also, can you guys hear me? Feels like it's going in and out, or I drank too much coffee today. Great. So if you're having troubles hearing, just raise your hand and we'll resolve it. So yeah, very grateful for the invitation to be here tonight. But without further ado, I would like to give our esteemed panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. And I would ask you to please introduce your name, and then in 1 or 2 sentences, and I really mean 2 sentences, explain what your connection is to the transportation sector.
I guess that I'm first. My name is Don DiCostanzo. I am the founder of Pedigo Electric Bikes, and I'm also now, and I sold, my last business was I owned 40 car washes. I sold those, and then I sold the majority interest in my electric bike company, and I'm back in the car wash business again.
My name is Bill Beverly. I am co-founder of a company called Evo Electric. We take existing diesel or gas trucks in the commercial vehicle sector, and we rapidly electrify them from gas or diesel to 100% electric in 2 days.
I'll just use it like this. Venus Jenkins, CEO and co-founder of ChargeNet Stations. We are a charge point developer and operator. What that means is we develop battery storage with fast chargers at fast food restaurants. So we build the network for EVs.
Hello, hi, my name is Dick Hui Chuan. I'm a former Fortune 500 executive. I work in the in aviation, space, and EV. So I cover a fair bit of the transportation ecosystems. And now I'm doing consultant and software and AI related to mobility as well.
I'm Kate Lynch. I'm co-founder and CEO of NeoLaunch. I'm building the lowest cost launch possible. My rockets are net zero and something called single stage to orbit, reusable launch vehicles, vertical takeoff, vertical landing.
All right, thanks for sticking to the 2-sentence rule. I thought it was pretty good. Okay, so first question of the night, and I want to direct it squarely at Kate because you're bringing great energy to the room.
Oh, I'll take it. Thank you.
What is one controversial belief that you hold in your area of expertise in the transportation sector?
So what I'm building is actually highly controversial, single stage to orbit. It's actually, the idea's been around for a long time. Von Braun's rockets were actually kind of a form of single stage to orbit. And the reason this is so controversial is, one, people think that it's impossible, not true. And two, engineers are taught to maximize, payload and minimize gross mass. But if you want to maximize for high operability, low cost, and high performance, then you really shift this paradigm. So what I'm building is actually like, it can be, it's a huge hot topic in space if this can be done, but it can't be done.
So a naysayer, how would they respond to that pitch that you just gave? What are they concerned with?
The engines aren't good enough. How do you get things lightweight? No, well, the big thing is nobody can beat Elon. Nobody should even bother trying. Elon owns space. No one should go into launch. That's actually the biggest debate, which is not true. This is the technology that leapfrogs SpaceX.
Okay, speaking of things that sound impossible, Bill, I wonder if you've maybe heard that statement before. Don't try to compete with Elon. What are you guys doing over there trying to convert trucks to electric?
Yeah, the nice thing about it is we're not competing with Elon directly, because Elon hasn't set his sights yet on medium-duty electrification, meaning all the middle mile, last mile trucks. He's doing Pepsi trucks, he's doing cars, some weird Cybertruck thing. And so what we're doing is, it's controversial in our sector because we're focusing on something that isn't high volume necessarily, but it represents 30% of all global emissions, right? It's something that has to be transitioned. And waiting for a vehicle manufacturer in this space is going to take a very, very long time, because they don't have the same motivations as high volume passenger vehicle manufacturers. So it's always the question, when is Elon going to eat your lunch? I'm like, well, Elon hasn't eaten the full passenger vehicle lunch yet. He's only got 9 to 12% market share in the United States, which is good. It's impressive. But Elon's not going to overnight take over medium duty and middle mile transportations.
So what are some of the challenges associated with the specific characteristics of medium-duty vehicles as it relates to electrifying them? What are some of the operational challenges that they still have being electric?
Yeah, so middle mile and medium-duty trucks are all about operational cost. So total cost of ownership is the biggest challenge. Doesn't matter what the powertrain is, doesn't matter what the source of fuel is. It's about uptime, and there's a metric. It's a tri-fold metric that our customers like. It's dollar per ton mile. Right, so it's like, how do I take all of those things and I put them into an operational schema that shows me that I can actually depend on, my asset actually delivering value and receiving that value full term. So in this sector, it's not just about range. It's not about, the cool benefits that you have with, all these fun technologies you see on passenger vehicles. It's all about dollars. It's a B2B business. And so in that, we have to actually develop something that makes financial sense for the customer before it makes the sexiest sense, right? It doesn't have to be a brand new ground up technology. It's something that is rapidly introduced in a vehicle that they already recognize, and it stays alive, it stays dependable, and it opens up new revenue streams, which I would love to talk about if we had more time.
Yeah, I want to bring Venus's perspective in here for just a second, if I can pick on you. So yeah, this question of but does it make sense? What about the cost? How can I really make money with that? Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the conversations that you have with your customers and how you talk to them about why this makes financial sense at the end of the day, not just saving the planet and everything else.
The capital markets, I mean, everybody could write a book on that, the inefficiencies in capital markets. And on top of that, how do you take an innovative product and not just base it on the pricing at innovation? If you have to have innovation, but you also have to prove it to the market and investors that this is a scalable product. And that's a key piece, even when you're pitching to investors, or even if you have to believe in it, that this is a scalable innovation. So going back to your question, how do we convince capital markets, or in my case, infrastructure investors, that this is worth investing? There needs to be some policy signals. and there needs to be some level of adoption past the inflection point. What that all means in simple terms is that let's focusing on the EV market, that we're not going to go back. So the market has signaled that this segment is ripe for growth now. So that's one signal for capital markets. And then the other policy signal is coming from state governments, federal governments, that they believe in this technology too and they want to scale it. Because at the end of the day, as of right now, it is still pretty capital intense projects, be it rocket ships, be it EVs, be it conversion or EV charging infrastructure. So once you have those signals, there are early investors, there are early believers, and they will be rewarded handsomely because they are the early risk takers. So I went in a very roundabout way, but that's how I look at those early investor, early capital market signals to convince that these are the right investments to take risk on, because now you have the right data points pointing in the direction of that these are scalable investments.
I'm glad you brought up the signals and investors. I feel like I've been in many meetings where investors will say, great signal, where's someone making money right now, right? And Don and I had a brief chat before he came up on stage today. Very difficult industry that you've been involved with. Some call it micromobility, others electric two-wheel, et cetera. Very questionable who's making money in that particular industry today. Would love you to speak to, like, what is the bear case for, making money in the two-wheel segment?
When I started in 2008 in the electric bike space, there were 4 competitors. Today there are 400. And unfortunately, that makes it difficult for anybody to make money. And then it was accentuated by a lot of venture capital and private equity firms investing untold amounts of capitals into this business when they had no sustainable business model. They were spending $500 in customer acquisition costs to sell a $1,000 bike that cost them $700 to make. So every time they sold a bike for $1,000, they would lose $200 plus all their costs. So that when the money ran out, and who's left standing? What's been left standing are the companies that these guys that invested hundreds of millions of dollars into the space, and now they're trying to save that investment. And the only way they can do it is to put more money in so they can save all the money that they did. So it consequently caused capital to dry up because there was a sustainable business model. I operated my company for 15 years, and 12 out of those 15 years I made a profit. And I only had $2.5 million in invested capital. My competitors had hundreds of millions of dollars investor capital, but they didn't have a sustainable business model. And that's the advice I give to any entrepreneur. When you start, make sure that the business you're in can make a profit from day one. You may not make a profit, but you better have positive gross margin. And everybody says, well, when I get to 5 million units, I can make a profit. Well, you're never going to get to 5 million units because nobody's going to give you the money to get there. So, and that's true in all micromobility, whether it's scooters. I was at an investor conference with the folks from Bird Scooter. Okay, they had $1 billion invested in Bird. $1 billion, okay? The company was there trying to raise $20 million because it went into bankruptcy. All the equity people lost all their money, and they're now trying to revive it on a different business model. And that business model was also flawed. I asked them how long their scooters last in the street. Okay, what's the most anybody would guess that you think one of these scooters would last? The absolute longest life expectancy of a scooter share. Somebody guess. 6 months? Anybody want to go longer than that? 2 years, a year? Well, my guess was 6 months. If they had a really good one, they claimed 6 years. Okay, so that was the flaw in their business model because they're not going to last 6 years. The 6 months, they used to last 60 days. And they may make a really good one. So the point of that is anybody in business should look at the business model. Now, when I left Pedigo, I decided to get in the battery manufacturing business. I was determined I was going to make batteries in this country. And I had a factory set up in Statesville, North Carolina. I did all the math, got everything all figured out. I couldn't buy the cells in the U.S. I had to buy them from China. to make money. If I didn't buy them from China, I couldn't make any money because their sales cost $1 a piece, and the ones in the U.S. are making $4 or $5 a piece. So it cost me more to make the battery pack than I could sell it for. So there's a lot of challenges in micromobility. You know, importing most of our stuff from Asia, building battery packs are a problem. Elon Musk is definitely the guy that's figured it out. Has anybody been to an Elon Musk factory? What's the most amazing thing about those factories? So that's the answer. That's the only way we're going to beat China is automation. His cars come in and rolled aluminum, and a week later it goes out as a car. Okay, it's just absolutely amazing. He's done something that I've never seen anybody do before. I don't know if that answered your question, but I answered the question I wanted to ask.
No, that's great. Wouldn't be a good panel if they weren't answering other questions. I just want to follow up on a quick comment on that. There are so many aspects of factories that can be automated. I just talked to a startup last week from Korea that developed, you guys, autonomous driving, right? We think of these new Waymo cars. You've probably seen them or heard about them in LA, where it's taxi. That's the use case everyone talks about. But you would not believe the human capital that goes into repositioning cars at factories. So there are satellite images of these same factories that are super automated with Teslas, and there's like 1,000 guys running around in the parking lot, moving the cars around like Tetris and getting them positioned to get on boats and trains, etc. And what this company has developed is a very specific autonomous driving technology that can connect directly to the onboard telematics of the vehicle and will drive the vehicle off the factory line once it's completed production. So, seemingly a very sort of niche use case, but incredibly valuable for the automotive makers because they got to figure out how to automate the process of getting their cars to the customer, right? Like physically to the customer. And so these guys have deals with, Honda, BMW, all the big brands. And then the key thing here, and I promise I'll stop for a second and I'll get too nerdy about this, but extremely difficult to get the trust of the automakers to allow a startup like this to access the onboard telematics of the vehicles and get all that data. I see nodding over here. And so the fact that they've been able to even accomplish this in the first place is a real sign of the solution that they're bringing to the table. So very excited about that. I won't tell you the name of the company yet because we haven't invested yet and I don't want any competition. So Duke, I had a question for you. We're talking a lot, somewhat pessimistic conversation about the future of transportation. Bet you guys didn't think we were going to come and shit on the future of transportation, did you? But Duke works at companies that make a lot of money in transportation. I'm thinking about the aerospace example you shared to me with Bombardier. You talked about them shifting away from narrow-body aircraft and getting into premium passenger jets. Can you talk us through a little bit some of the thinking that went behind there in terms of finding a market segment where you can make an incredible amount of money, and how that worked?
In this particular case, they just basically exited a particular market space that was low margins because the airline business, if you look at the airline business in the last 100 years, you add all the years they make money and all the years they lose money, it's a break-even business. They literally over 100 years make $0 exactly. So as a manufacturer, if you wanted to invest in the aviation, your customer makes $0, you're not going to make a lot of dollars. So it's a very simple business case. What Bombardier did was go towards they completely exited that market, and they got into the business. They focused purely on personal mobility and private jets. So they started off at the high-end private jets. And why they did that was simply the number of billionaires growing around the world is faster than any demographic groups. So the more billionaire there are, the more private jets you have. So if you look at the top level marketplace, they just choose to go where the money is and do that. But since those days, I think now with the technology into the marketplace and all these things, a lot of people are trying to solve kind of the next evolution of personal transportation. The problem with private jet is you have to be worth about $500 million or more to be in the market for it, roughly. Now you can buy the Honda Jet, which is a Honda Jet is like $7 million, which is still expensive, but it's a Honda Jet, but it's tiny. But what's happening now is with technology, all the cost is driving down significantly because of automations, because of AI, because of all these things. And so there's a lot of companies now are going towards more personal. We are not quite there yet because of the regulatories. There's a million reasons why. But just to answer your question, why Bombardier did that, it was simple market view of what's happening. You go after customers who make no money, you're going to make no money. Simple as that.
But Boeing made a lot of money selling the aircraft to United and everyone like that. So that's where you make the money.
Yeah.
Not being a service provider.
Yeah, and Boeing aircraft are the high end of the aviation world in the sense that it's larger airplanes. When you go into the regional airplane, the margin gets thinner and thinner. So, yeah.
Duke, it's interesting you talk about personal mobility. I'm assuming you were referring to in airplanes or flying.
I refer to anything in between you land at the airport and you get to your house.
Okay.
So the whole idea of like a flying cars, it's a silly one. It'll never happen.
Oh, interesting. Tell us more about that. Why isn't it?
Well, just the basic infrastructure. The ATC aircraft traffic controller can barely handle 5,000 airplanes flying simultaneously right now. They can barely handle it. You're going to ask them to do that for 10 million cars flying? It's not going to happen. So just the regulatory is not working. The second reason why it's never going to work is if you have a car accident, maybe you get hurt, maybe you don't. If you have two flying cars hitting, you die. 100% sure you die. Not only you die, the house below will get burned and you kill a few other people along the way. So that doesn't make sense as well. So who's going to insure all of that? And then many people, the young people in our building want to get a driver license. You want to ask them to get a driver license and a pilot license simultaneously. They're not going to do it. And so the whole idea of flying car, it's a silly one that's never going to happen. But the idea of the last mile could very well happen in the sense that if you have but you need more of like the equivalent of an airport, but for drones. So it's like, let's say you land at LAX and you want to get here now, it'll take you 2.5 hours, maybe 3. But if you have a landing spot and you have drones that go back and forth, it's a 7-minute flight, 7-minute flights. And when it's short distance enough, you can do battery swapping technology. You can just swap battery as you land. So you don't have to carry a lot of mass by doing that, for example. So you can do the short distance, the last mile. So that, to me, the extension of the aviation to the mobility will be that. It will never be the personal transportation and kind of the flying car idea. So it just doesn't make from so many angles, it doesn't make sense.
With current infrastructure and technology, I agree with you. It doesn't make sense maybe the next 5-10 years. But when you have an idea of how you can shift the world, right now in America, it's much harder. I think the Middle East is trying to figure out going after those markets, but that's also a problem to solve. If someone solves air traffic control,
so
then
the Middle East is not trying to solve this problem.
they're not trying. They're trying to bring people in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Middle East, what is the last mile thing? It's happening in the Middle East faster than it's happening here.
That's for sure.
So one of the things about the U.S. is the regulatory is extremely long. So when I work in the aviation industry, we had meeting with Google. Everything we talk about was in years. They talk everything in months. So there's like massive disconnect between the two worlds. Although they try to converge a little bit, it's still far from. Yeah, it's still some ways.
So, Kate, give us an example of a not silly aerospace company or concept that you're excited about that you saw recently.
I think that there's a lot of cool innovation going on, but I want to discuss a little bit of the gap is right now you have single mission vehicles. And so there's how are you going to make money when it's like you're just delivering passengers to ISS or this. So what needs to shift, which is my focus on, is infrastructure that is plug and play, that's multi-mission. And also the thing that really revolutionized transportation on Earth is point-to-point transfer. because when you can go anywhere in the world in 45 minutes, right? When you can launch cargo and think about emergency, all of that, that's the real next game changer. And that's what single stage to orbit does. So I'm very bullish on the technologies once you have customizable spaceship, once the cost drops, because right now you're waiting 2 years for a launch. And there's a lot of, and I have to explain why transportation space is really important, if that's okay, because a lot of people don't relate it to Earth, right? And all these automatic cars use GPS, right? That's space technology. But what are things that are waiting to happen, right, in space? Right now, Earth is a closed loop system with limited resources, right, and limited land. When you open up the space economy, this means you can 100x the Earth's economy, infinitely times it, because now you can break the limited resources paradigm. You can off-world mining, so space transportation can become very important. And then also logistics back to Earth. You can off-world other types of toxic things, and you can, like if you're worried about overpopulation, you can get people off the Earth, right? So I think that the revolution in transportation, not the evolution, but the revolution really happens on Earth with point-to-point transfer and with off-world infrastructure, because that is what's going to grow our economy here.
Tell us a little bit more about what point-to-point transfer looks like. Describe that.
All right. You guys have all watched a rocket launch on YouTube, if not in person, right? So I'm just going to, you see there's 2 stages, right? Generally, sometimes more, and that's 3 systems of engineering. And you see this drops off. Everyone probably saw the Starship getting caught, right? So I have a single stage. So with point-to-point transfer, when you have single stage orbit, it means this vehicle takes off and it can land, which means you can do inland. I need a 10 meter by 10 meter concrete pad to launch from, right? I can launch from sea. So point-to-point transfer means I take my rocket, it's here, and I land it over there. And you can get anywhere in the world, 45 minutes or less, right? So that is a true, revolutionary transportation system.
Yeah, that's going to be pretty expensive though, right?
No, well, you would think, yes, but we're going to be able to bring launch costs down to about $2 million a launch, right? And right now, if you're thinking it's at least well over 150 million a launch. And when people, because we also sell our vehicles, right? It's a minimum of 100 reuses, if not several more. Then all of a sudden, a lot of people can get in the game. So when you really need it under an hour anywhere in the world, there is, a market for that, and especially natural disaster. And I know people they want to get their gold from one country to another pretty quickly. They like it. Gold, actually, the gold market is kind of insane. I've been learning a lot about
serving the gold in under our gold.
Well, also obviously there's military capabilities, but not for this audience, maybe. There's a lot of reasons for point-to-point transfer.
I want to shift back to what Duke was talking about regulatory environment, because that starts to get really fun. We love talking about regulations, particularly Venus and Bill. Starting with Venus, if it's okay. Can you describe a little bit how the regulatory environment, on the one hand, potentially helps the business that you're in, and then talk a little bit about how it's maybe hurting it?
I think the first part is somewhat self-explanatory in the sense California, once again, California signals the market, not just in the US, but the rest of the world, that we are ready to accept this new technology and scale it. So how do they do that? When we set very ambitious goals. When we say we're going to hit 50% renewable energy by 2030, we're actually ahead of that goal. And how do we get to renewable energy? Everything comes into play, as well as the carbon emissions and the tailpipe requirements, all of that with 50% electric vehicles, I think, by 2035. So from that perspective, the regulatory support is very great, and private-public partnerships look at that as a very positive signal, and then you start to build upon that. Now let's talk about the flip side of it. If you can build infrastructure in California, I'm a firm believer you could build it anywhere in the world. What I mean by that is they will throw everything at you. Yes, the policymakers are signaling it, the governor wants it, everybody wants it, but then you go to the local city jurisdictions. And I will give a very specific example. One of our sites, without calling out the city, it's in Northern California, that's all I would say, is we're building charging stations, fast chargers with energy storage and solar. So it's a distributed energy resources play. I won't go into that. They asked us, we will only get a permit if we put a bike rack. And I couldn't connect the dots. The local jurisdiction, the permitting department was, nope, your permit is stuck. I wanted to fight it. I'm like, we're talking EVs here. This is not even electric bikes. This is just simple bike rack. And the advice I got from my engineering firm is like, Venus, don't pick this battle. Just put $1,000 bike rack there. And that's what I mean. I mean, there have been times where we have to get to the mayors of the cities and talk about their climate action plan. They should be supportive of that. But on the ground, the reality, the regulatory reality is we're not on the same page. It's somewhat of a wild, wild west still. So there's the both sides of the coin.
So did you end up buying the bike rack or?
We did put a bike rack, and now I have to make sure there's a bicycle there, take pictures, send it to the permit office. It's just a fun story. And we have so many of these at every site, every city. There's a new flavor of it. There's no standardization for charging network, even for EVs. And I'm sure Bill could talk about how lack of standardization causes so much noise and additional complexity that we don't really need to have. So I'll stop there because I could
That
go on.
regulation sounds really light in compared to space. So I mean, like, I would love to be like, okay, stick a bike rack, done with the FAA.
Well, I didn't go into more complex things where they.
I know, I just.
Yeah. No, I love what I learned so much, point to point. I was just fascinated by this, but I'll turn it over to Bill now.
Same question?
If you'd like, or you can answer an entirely different question if you'd
No,
like to.
this is a good one because what's the opposite of a safe word? Regulation, is that for me? I don't know. I have so many thoughts about it, so I'm bundling them up. I go into this hypnotic trance, I got to be careful because when we talk about regulation, I just go off. So first and foremost, I totally agree with what Venus said. I mean, being in California is amazing for a business like us, having access to the infrastructure, both from the financial incentives and the goals that are being set. Positive regulations, saying, for example, in the trucking industry, just like everybody may have heard in this room, that cars need to be electrified in the next less than a decade, right? Trucks need to be electrified by 2045. All future sales have to be zero emissions at that point. So that's a positive push in our direction of producing these zero emission vehicle technologies. Now, on the negative side, I would say, and I'm going to limit my focus here because there's a lot of negativity that you could find. Conversion market is something in the medium duty sector that has been explored by other companies. I want to tie into something that Don said earlier, where a lot of the first coming companies that attempted conversions were lauded with capital and access, saying we could do all these things. When it came down to execute, none of them were able to sustainably to deliver a product, and they're all gone. Some of them went to public markets, and then on their first and last earnings call said, hey, our SG&A costs are $30 million last quarter. What was your revenue? 15. Sorry, speak up. $15 million. So you're twice as expensive to operate than you are, and you've been telling people that the market's ready for you. Oh, the market's not ready. It's not the market's problem. It's the problem with the fact that everybody thinks pouring money into the solution is going to fix it. It's about a business plan. I totally echo that. That being said, regulation doesn't stymie the innovation that can exist in these types of companies. So it's easy to get a company started. It's hard to keep it going and to meet these targets. So the point I'm trying to get to is it isn't, again, sexy to electrify the medium duty sector. I think it is. I think it's, my wife likes it too because it pays for the bills, I guess. But, people ask us all the time, why don't you take your products and why don't you electrify a car? And I'm like, well, we've done it before. I mean, one of my conspirators is here in the room. We used to electrify Aston Martins. We used to do Formula E stuff. It's fun. It makes money. It is not scalable, right? Because regulation says that once you get to about, I don't know the number anymore, but 200 units, you have to crash test those vehicles. You become the new Aston Martin. You become the new Honda. You become the new whatever. That kind of regulation doesn't exist in the trucking market because from a perspective of how insurance and financing and bankability covers that market, it says, well, if something crashes into this thing, it's total. So I don't need to crash test a truck because truck does most of the damage. I just need to, reduce my regulation, make it appropriate road safe, and make sure it doesn't explode of its own accord. But who here has seen a truck that has a gas tank on the side? Has anybody seen those? I'm sure you have, right? Gas is explosive. If that truck gets T-boned, it will explode. And I promise you, see, I'm about to go deep here. I promise you that that explosion, that cacophony of controlled energy, of contained energy, is way worse than a lithium battery fire that everybody claims to be worried about, right? Lithium battery fires are scary because they're uncontained, they're high burning, but they don't cacophony. They don't explode at the same release of energy, right? Gosh, okay, I'm going to slow it down because now I want to go into batteries, but let's talk about that some other time. So anyway, regulation in our space, it's easier for us to get a concept out. But the last thing I want to say about that is in the most progressive state for electrification, California, or the most pseudo nation in the world, there is an incentive available for conversions or for zero emission vehicles. That incentive is provided at point of purchase to our customers. We see the full book revenue, which is awesome because these trucks can go up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. At our competitors' level, we're close to 100,000 or so, right? We get up to $60,000 off of every one of those trucks. So you end up accessing a truck for less than you would for a brand new Model 3. Thank you, California. But we want more, but not just us, because our customers want more. Fleet owners want free trucks because they don't understand, and they've been hurting sometimes, like I said, from these previous offenders. They don't understand the technology well enough to really dive into it quite yet. So how do we get free? We want regulations to open up from a CARB perspective that allow our trucks to get 100% of the same incentive that a brand new OEM would, a brand new vehicle manufacturer. Just because they're an original equipment manufacturer, they're trusted. But you know what? They move slow. Some of these OEMs have announced products that won't show up till 2028. And you think they're going to take their entire lines and convert them over to electric? Absolutely not. So these regulation-backed funds are sitting there aging, losing their value, while fleet owners are stuck in the middle saying, how do I get into this market? You told me I have to be compliant as of next year, January 1st. I'm already losing money paying the government for this, but I can't find any solutions. Fix my problem. So that's where we need to evolve regulations to say conversions and reducing and recycling some of the components on the road instead of just scrapping them all is a viable and efficient way to actually put more technology and more zero emission vehicles on the road than just waiting for OEMs to do all the work.
Let me give you a little practical experience in the regulation. When we came out with electric bikes, everybody said, no, electric bikes, don't allow them on the bike path, don't do it. Well, we got together as an industry and we wrote a law, AB 1096. We took it to Sacramento. We did everything right. We got it passed to allow electric bikes to be on the bike path with certain rules and restrictions. And then the industry got together and we got it passed in 47 out of 50 states. So as mentioned earlier, where California goes, the rest of the country goes, that was our theory, and it actually works. So if you've got regulatory issues, Sacramento is the place to do it. Through your local assembly people, they can help get laws changed there. They'll help have an impact, certainly in the entire country, maybe in some cases in the world. One of the big conflicts in it, though, is the electrification of automobiles and all transportation, is we have a big problem with regulation. And the regulation is we're not building any power plants. So I don't know if you guys remember a couple of summers ago when they said that we need to make all cars electric by 2035. 9 days later, they said, if you have an electric car, don't drive it. We don't have enough electricity. So that's a huge problem. That's something that needs to be addressed, whether it's nuclear or some other method. The rest of the world's building nuclear power plants. We are not, because they're deemed unsafe. The fact is they're very safe now. They have been unsafe in the past when they didn't know how to do it. Now they know how to do it, and they're very safe. So from a regulatory standpoint, we have to lift that big place down in San Onofre that sits empty and the government pays to maintain it. Could be resurrected or new ones could be built, but we're not going to go very far with electrification if we don't have any electricity.
course.
This is maybe market misinformation. I used to work at Southern California Edison. I worked at San Onofre as a nuclear engineer. I don't know if we need to necessarily build more power plants. I'm pro-nuclear, coming from nuclear, so it's not about nuclear. Right now, we have abundance of power. The energy market pricing, if you look at it, this is specific to California. I can't speak for states with snow and more climate variation, but in California, there are times in the day when the energy pricing is going negative. What
Mine
that means
Bitcoin.
is, sorry.
I just said mine Bitcoin.
What that means is, yeah, that there is so much power on the grid that they're asking solar producer to curtail the electricity. The gap is not necessarily that we don't have enough energy. The gap is we don't have enough energy when the sun is not shining or when we don't have wind generating. And that's where the battery storage part comes in. And California is really pushing hard. And once again, the policy signals are that 4 to 9 p.m., that abundance of power, that curtailment, that power that basically we are saying $0 curtailing it. Now that needs to be stored and converted and used during 4 to 9 p.m. That's the gap. Electrification, the gap is most of the people get home between 4 to 9 p.m. and they plug in their cars, and that's when the sun is not shining. So I just wanted to make that little correction coming from utility market.
I would like to take regulation. I feel like I've learned a lot about electrification and regulation, but I'd love to take this to a bigger level. Regulation is an issue for national security, and it's why we're losing to China and innovation. We are so heavily regulated with when we want, how fast we can move forward. And the bureaucracy, like regulation with this, and also compliance for within government to get government dollars that goes to prime contractors. This is an issue for every one of us. So if we look at and so who gets funded, how they get funded, like Chinese government will throw like money at 20 different launch companies, right? And they're not like making like tons of little, all right, I need a little report on this every time you do this tiny thing. You know, this is why, I feel like Von Braun paraphrase said, how do you get to the moon? You use the paperwork. Right? So this is, we'll see what happens with this next administration, but we really need to move forward with deep tech in a hardcore way. And I think like everyone's, lives, innovation is important.
Can you give a specific example of where that's held back a particular project you think is important?
Well, launch is very big. I'll give an example, like for national security. Right now, spaceports, right? 12 ballistic missiles could wipe out all our spaceports. And it would take half a decade to rebuild that infrastructure. That means SpaceX wipe out. We need to be able to do inland launch, but FAA doesn't want inland launch. The military needs inland launch. States would love to have a world transportation hub, right, for point-to-point transfer and that type of stuff. So this is like a big sticking point. It's like, well, we could actually expand the space economy in all sorts of ways, bring it to many other states and all of this. But we have these very antiquated regulations, and I think people probably heard in the news, you always add all these different little layers of regulation, even to comply to do a small business innovation research proposal. The amount of tiny minutia of regulation, it takes you like 6 weeks worth of time just to comply with dumb stuff that you don't need to comply with. Because every time they had a problem, they add a regulation, but it doesn't mean that everybody should have to do all this tiny little stuff. Yeah.
Duke, I'm imagining you have a
Can
thought
I
on
give
this.
a bit of a counter view in regulation? Not that I'm for regulation.
Yeah.
But if you look at what happened to Boeing the last, 5 years.
No one should ever fund Boeing. I mean, that's a bigger systemic problem with prime contractors.
Yeah. So part of the problem with the FAA regulations is they delegate to the OEM to say that the airplane is safe. So because they don't have enough resources, they actually delegate the authority to the OEMs. So you basically self-regulate yourself, and you're self-incentivized to actually, your profit is a motivation, is not necessarily safety. So there's
With Boeing, that's true.
Yeah. So there's a reason for regulation. Having said that, the whole regulatory and aviation world, for example, had not caught up to reality. So like now, if you buy a drone above 250 grams, which is like nothing, anything more than that, you can barely fly. They don't know how to regulate that. So all these new technology. So if we talk about driverless cars, you can easily do driverless flying drones today, but the regulation doesn't know how to catch up to it. So right now we live in a world where regulations, it's required, but it hasn't caught up to where it needs to be. So because of that, everything's come to a crawl. So that's one of the problems, which is technology is now moving much, much faster than the people who can regulate it. So that's one of the biggest problems why things doesn't move. How it's going to change, I don't really have a good feel for how they're going to do that. But this is one of the barriers, because in aviation, the rate of failure is set as 1 in a billion flight hours. That's the rate of failure, 1 to -7 reliability. And so to do that is not that simple. Have you ever run a computer software and it's going to crash every so often? Or it can crash every so often when you're flying. Especially if you're going to remove the pilot. Like, how are you going to do that? But these are all the issues about regulation that it's really tricky right now because they don't know how to regulate. That's the problem.
Well, you don't have technical people in government, and I totally agree with you. We need some regulation. No one wants it to be a free-for-all, but having it impossible to innovate is another problem. And I think I think we need people who are technical and entrepreneurial running for office. So that would be nice. So if you're super nerdy out there, think about it.
So I'm severely triggered at this point. I think we said regulation at least 30 times. It's like that word. I have 2 kids, so I don't want to, if anybody, it's like they use this word, I hate to say it, moist. And for some reason, that's a trigger word for me, and regulation. So, but I think one of the things that I want to comment on is regulation in my head is typically a byproduct of strategy, whether that strategy is cohesive or whether it's not regulated, if you will. And so when you kind of look at different markets, one of the things we haven't talked about is like the European market and the regulation in the European market, especially in the automotive and commercial vehicle sector. It is over-regulated, by far, over-regulated. This business model we have will not work in Europe because Europe has said it's not viable for us to let anybody other than an OEM into this sector of producing vehicles. The end, right? Now, Renault, one of the biggest automotive manufacturers, has decided to go against that stream and say, let's prove that we can do this so that we can actually open up the competitive streams and actually introduce new companies to do this concept. So I want to take a step back and say, from an automotive perspective or a commercial vehicle perspective, strategy dictates regulation, and sometimes it doesn't come together as well as that strategy was intended, let's say, or that vision is cast. And so when you look at the 3 main markets, China, EU, and the United States, and you look at their strategic vision, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of follow-up on this one, so bear with me. This is an opinion piece. But China is dictated what the future looks like. There's a 10-year plan. They revise it every 10 years, 5 years, every year, actually. And they say, this is what we're going to do. You're going to do it. There's no buy-in. The government runs with absolute control. So it's no surprise that they're able to conquer this EV thing because they said they were going to do it 10 years ago, right? Even when you look at what regulation changed here in the United States, there's a regulation or a tax imposed on all batteries that come from China here in the United States. It's now 20% more expensive to import batteries from China than it was a year ago. One of our battery suppliers laughed at that. They said, okay, you guys can tax us. One of our battery suppliers is Chinese. You can tax us, but we need demand to stay flat. So we are going to discount the product price by 20% so that we can continue to run this world. Europe, meantime, doesn't have a viable battery manufacturing ecosystem. And that's because in a strategy perspective, they're much more united in what they want to do as a group, a bunch of like-minded European nations, obviously, but they've kind of stagnated in trying to figure out what the right policy is because they're trying to get it right on paper, right? Then there's the United States. We are the cowboys of the world. This is what made us good in innovation. This is why we still at the very top when it comes to the innovation pathways. But we're so busy trying to figure out what the right decision is from a political sense. It doesn't make sense. It's like, oh, what about this? How does this benefit this and that? There isn't a unified vision on whether we should do domestic battery manufacturing, whether climate change is real. I can't believe I said that, right? Whether, we should actually pour money in new technologies like nuclear or bring back the other ones. Like, why can't we have a cohesive vision that says, We need to gain authority in the world on creating new innovation and have the economic benefits benefit our country and countries that can also benefit, and do better at making the world a better place. Like, those things don't have to be separate topics, right? And so regulation is unfortunately a partisan approach here in the United States, where California versus non-California CARB states, for example. And I don't understand how it got there, because this is just science, it's just physics. And as long as we incentivize ourselves to improve the life of our operating mechanisms and our businesses and our children and our future generations, and do that domestically, we can combine those two things. This doesn't have to be segregated in a way where we're like, it's good or it's bad. We know how to make things. We know how to make them profitable, and we just need to get in that habit again. Hopefully I'm not triggered anymore, but thank you.
I'm a little bit more optimistic than you about that. I just want to share one anecdote before we have another question. On the day that I got the text message in California a couple of years ago to turn my air conditioning off and stop charging my EV, we were right in the middle of negotiating an investment actually in a company that had developed a software platform directed at utility companies so that the customers of the utility, homeowners, could opt into a program whereby the utility could intervene in their home, and there was incentives associated with this, and direct their EV cars to basically charge up on excess power. Venus, we're talking about that during in office buildings as well, during periods of the day where energy was being produced in excess, to then be able to direct the cars to then offload energy at night. So another way of saying this is it's like a distributed battery storage system that is comprised of individual EV owners' vehicles spread throughout the entire ecosystem. So, not saying that that is the only solution for these challenges, but I'm quite optimistic that there's a lot of clever people out there that are working on, things that are directly speaking to some of these challenges. But I thought that was perfect time, because I'm literally getting a text message from, the governor or something, like, to shut my air conditioner off. I'm like, well, it seems like this is a real problem that these guys are working on. So anyway, just wanted to share that. I want to throw one more question to the panelists. Maybe we can have two, maybe three volunteers to answer this last question. I'm going to give, I want some bonus minutes for Q&A here, because I think we've had a robust discussion already. But first, a final question before we flip over to Q&A. We are in a university setting, right? Let's effort that. And would love to hear any panelist perspective on, for students who are excited about the challenges and opportunities that they're hearing today, what would be your personal advice if they're seeking a career in the transportation sector more broadly, and some of the themes that we've been discussing tonight? What would be your single best advice you can give about how a student could embark on a pathway or a career in the transportation sector more broadly? Volunteers?
I've got two words, well, maybe three. AI, if that's one word or two, and automation. So AI is changing everything. If you're not involved in AI right now, you're missing. As student, as anything. If you're not using ChatGPT, you're missing the world. It's so powerful. There's so much it does, and so much you can learn from to ask it any kind of question. I loaded a 9-page financial document into ChatGPT, and within 3 minutes, I had an analysis that would have taken an accountant a month to figure out. And then I started asking questions. So AI is it. The second part is automation. Anything to do with making things without people and automating it where we've got less labor involved is how this country is going to be competitive. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to get into some type of business, look at AI and things that are AI driven. I'm building AI car washes now. They're car washes that they scan the car and it decides what kind of wash to apply on that car. So it uses less water, less soap, and there's no people involved in it. And it's automated. So to me, that's the combination of those two things combined. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to do something creative, find something in one or both of those industries combined.
Other volunteers?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I got a lot to say on this too, but well, first thing, I started my career as a theater major, a performance theater major, because I wanted to be somebody. My parents and my grandparents were all engineers, Boeing, all these great companies. Growing in their shadow was something I wasn't really looking forward to. So I tried something different. I learned, and I didn't do a great job at it. So I learned from that. And then I got into something that I was naturally good at, engineering, mechanical engineering. So the point is, don't be afraid of failure. It is something you learn and grow from. You can advance very quickly by just putting yourself out there, trying things, and figuring out how you fix the failure, the issue, the problem, right? That's the most important thing I look for as a hiring manager, is I don't expect you to be perfect. Try something, move the needle, progress it, make mistakes. I'm here to support you. Can you correct the mistakes you've learned? Now you won't do it again, and you'll pass that on, right? So don't be afraid of failure, but also humble yourself, right? Do the work. Go into the industry without expecting that everything is ready for you to take over, right? Do the work, jump in. Work is hard, but people take notice of it, right? And it sets the right stage for future leadership. If you're doing the work, people take notice of the fact that you're not just talking about the things you do, but you actually have the background to actually perform the things that you do. And one day, if you're an entrepreneur, you will do the things that you think are right, and you will own that journey for yourself. And there's nothing better than that work stream that you can follow back on and saying, like, I did everything I said I was going to do, and here's the proof.
Okay, you guys want to fight for the last answer? Venus?
Quickly, I thought it used to be such a cliche statement that work in something you're passionate about. And it is so true to the core, because why I say that is after the first 6 months, the excitement wears off and it's grind. It's a day in, day out grind. You better love what you do.
I struggle with this question, actually because of AI specifically, because I keep wondering what job is going to be there in the future. Since I cannot predict, I feel like the advice for me is be a generalist, because whatever you predict, you're going to be wrong. So I don't care what you predict, you're wrong. So if that's the case, then study something that's more generalist, because AI to me is becoming like utility. It's like electricity. It's becoming like everything else. So to study AI means what? To do electricity? Like it doesn't mean anything to me. It's a utility that you're going to use for everything. So if you're going to use it for everything, then you really should study kind of everything in a way, because what AI allows you to do is put all the pieces together that are unrelated, or make things that make sense. Doesn't make sense? Makes sense. So the more broad your experience, the more, if everybody study the same thing, go to the same school, get out the same degree, why makes you think you're going to think anything different? So I would say diversify your experience as much as possible. Be a generalist, because you cannot predict 2 years from now or next week. So you think you can predict like 10 years from now? I just can't imagine that. So because I don't know, I think a generalist is probably the advice I give to people.
Okay, Kate, come
All
on.
right.
You gotta do it now too.
I would say be open-minded that whatever beliefs and truths you hold, whether it's in innovation, politics, or anything, could be wrong, and be open to new information, because that's a lot of innovation happens on things that people say can never happen. So having an open and flexible mind, seeking great mentors, and if you're an engineer, there is such a lack of good system engineers out there that, spacecraft is complex. So if you're specialists in propulsion, awesome. You might not know how to build an entire spacecraft. So if you're looking, where can I get a job? I know I can get a job. If you become a great systems engineer, there will always be work for you. Not always, but, it is both. But there's a huge market for that.
You were going to say mine Bitcoin.
Oh, well, for the energy, there's like some good use cases. But yes, Bitcoin and HODL.